What up, Mad Kaiser here. Now, of course, I promised some Xenoblade content on my channel after my last Xenoblade video, and of course, here I am to deliver. And with the recent release of Future Redeemed now gone by, thus concluding the Klaus Saga that began all the way back in 2010, thus making it Takahashi's vision finally complete after rather 2 unsuccessful attempts, I thought it was high time to officially look back on the entire Xenoblade series. So, welcome to one and all to this wonderful Xenoblade Chronicles Retrospective. But before we begin, if you like what you're seeing here, like the video, click on subscribe if you're new, and by all means hit that bell notification icon to get all updated on all RPG content from yours truly. So yeah, welcome to this wonderful Xenoblade fan retrospective, and thankfully I won't be the only one covering this, as I've contacted some good friends of mine who are fans of the series. So sit back and enjoy, grab some Napon coins as well as some Armu steak, and enjoy this long journey of the entire Xenoblade franchise. But before we head to Xenoblade itself, let's wind back into the mind and life of the series creator, Tetsuya Takahashi, a man who started his life in the video game industry by working with first Neon Falcom during the 1980s, serving as creating graphics for Monsters in Ys 3, Wanderers from Ys, and then an artist for Dragon Slayer: The Legend of Heroes. In the 90s, he then moved to work at Squaresoft, being a graphic designer for the later half of the much more acclaimed Final Fantasy titles 4, 5, and 6, as well as other games like Secret of Mana, Front Mission, and Romantic Saga. He would also work on the SNES juggernaut known as Chrono Trigger, and also marry fellow Square employee and writer Kari Tanaka, better known as her pen name Soraya Saga. I hope I'm not butchering that one. Both Takahashi and his wife would then propose to create a concept for the upcoming Final Fantasy VII. However, Squaresoft would decline that concept as they felt it was more too dark and mature, but yet they were still intrigued by this idea. So Takahashi would become the director of that concept and make it his own project. Initially serving as the project known as Project Noah, he would then propose that it would serve as possibly a sequel to Chrono Trigger. However, that feat seemed rather impossible, so he decided to make it an original IP instead, which was eventually known as Xenogears. This game would be praised for its story, gameplay, and soundtrack as one of the best Squaresoft RPGs for the PS1. However, during the development of the game, some shortcomings were made that really dissatisfied Takahashi, as the final product did not really achieve the vision he made, especially when the 2-year development cycle he was given with his team just couldn't match the scale of his project. So ideas he had were cut. The team even he worked with was more inexperienced, and to make sure he did not miss the deadline, he had to resort of splitting the game into 2 discs, with the second one being more infamous, being completely notorious for having its pace overall just rushed and less on the actual gameplay. Years by, he decided to leave Squaresoft with his own team after believing that they would solely focus more on Final Fantasy, which he did not agree with, and would thus never letting him create any more projects, even a sequel to Xenogears alone. With leaving Squaresoft, he and his team who worked on Xenogears would form their own company known as Monolith Soft in 1999, which a name I'm pretty sure you guys are familiar with in the JRPG industry and Nintendo-like nowadays, but back then that was yet to be proven. Their goal in mind was simple: to have full creative freedom as the developers so that they could focus on the projects that they had passion for, an idea that the founder of Namco at the time, Masayaka Nakamura, shared the same interest, attaining them and serving as their publisher. With that goal set in stone, Monolith Soft were free to work, and for Takahashi's case, his goal was simple: to create on what he couldn't fully attempt to realize when making Xenogears at Squaresoft. So both he and his wife pretty much made a spiritual successor, thus making the result of Xenosaga. This pretty much served as a reboot, as well as aiming to realize the themes and ideas he intended for Xenogears, as well as to also make a compelling narrative. With Xenosaga Episode 1 in 2002 on the PlayStation 2, having about 8 hours of FMVs with high quality, and commercially, it was quite strong. Unfortunately, however, after its release, the Xenosaga series were now given to new staff, with Takahashi both supervising the product and providing the draft scripts. Under this new staff in question, the original script saw several changes, and its much planned 6-part structure was cut down in half. As a result, the second game, and probably the most infamous out of the trilogy, was only able to reach 50% of Namco's projection, and Xenosaga Episode 3, which, while improvement and pretty much a satisfactory game, sold the absolute worst of the trilogy. That may be also because not only was the team again just not well experienced, but also the scale of this project far exceeded the budget that was given. Things not only just got really bad, as Nakamura, who once supported them for the long run, retired as the head of Namco, and eventually the merger of Bandai and Namco formed in 2005. And with a new entity comes new principles, as they were no longer willing to take any more commercial risks. And while Monolith Soft have made quite a couple of other games under Namco, like Baten Kaitos, Takahashi's main intentions were left in the gutter once again, and the mixed response for the Xenosaga trilogy only just gave low morale to Monolith Soft once more. All was not lost, however, for both Takahashi and Monolith Soft though, as an executive director from Nintendo by the name of Shinji Hatano came to them with a proposition, who advised them to create on just such creative, innovative projects. Spurred on by Hatano's supportive attitude, Monolith Soft decided to break away from Bandai Namco to become now a Nintendo subsidiary. This provided Monolith Soft creative freedom in exchange for software development exclusive for Nintendo platforms. This was good news as it aligned what Monolith aimed for, and Takahashi was already at the early stages with a project struck by the idea of rival civilizations emerging on the two frozen bodies of warring gods. He and Hon constructed a model of the two gods to better visualize that idea. After bringing their idea to the Nintendo producer Hitoshi Yamagami, the team began development in 2007. Takahashi later stated that the game's development was a means to boost the company morale after the failure of Xenosaga. The director, Ko Kojima, started his directorial debut with this game, having previously written the scenario for Baten Kaitos Origins. The intended scale of the game caused problems though, and Takahashi reluctantly went to Yamagami with a list of proposals to cut down the game to a suitable size, as he was really accustomed to doing for his previous projects. However, thankfully, Yamagami rejected all of Takahashi's suggestions. Instead, he persuaded Nintendo to completely keep full support to the project and allow the team to continue and complete the work as envisioned. Development continued, and then finally, the project was unveiled at E3 2009, and what happened afterwards would change everything.
As we look back on the Xenoblade series, we must highlight the game that started it all. Xenoblade Chronicles provided the start to the fantastic Nintendo JRPG franchise that so many have come to love around the world. The game was developed by Monolith Soft and created by Tetsuya Takahashi, who had previously worked on several iconic JRPG franchises. These include the East series, Final Fantasy, Chrono Trigger, Xenogears, and Xenosaga. Xenoblade Chronicles released in 2010 in Japan for the Nintendo Wii. It eventually came to European and North American players in 2011 and 2012 respectively. The game also received a Nintendo 3DS port in 2015. Most recently, a remaster dubbed Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition released in 2020. It included enhanced visuals and interface, remastered music, quality of life upgrades, and a new epilogue called Future Connected. Though we have no shortage of Xenoblade games and content today, it's important to remember that Xenoblade Chronicles almost didn't make it to North American fans. Nintendo of America had no plans to release the game in North America initially, and so, a fan campaign called Operation Rainfall began in June 2011. Its goal was to bring 3 JRPGs released on the Wii and other regions to North American audiences. They included Xenoblade Chronicles, The Last Story, and Pandora's Tower. The campaign featured messaging across social media platforms, emails, and even handwritten letters sent to Nintendo of America headquarters. About 6 months later, in late 2011, Nintendo of America announced Xenoblade Chronicles would release in North America. We JRPG fans are a passionate bunch, and this provided a huge win for fans and an exciting beginning for the Xenoblade franchise. As the first game in this series, Xenoblade Chronicles set the foundation that later games would build upon. Let's go over 4 defining gameplay features that started with Xenoblade Chronicles and have continued throughout the series since then. First, Xenoblade Chronicles showcased the beautiful and vast open world of the Bionis. I still remember the moment in-game when you arrive at Gower Plains and are given the freedom to explore. It isn't an exaggeration to say you can spend hundreds of hours in this world. So many fans already have. These lands span different locales, from the sparkling waters of Aerith Sea to the icy cliffs of Valak Mountain. Beyond its pretty sights, this world boasts a host of items, quests, towns full of NPCs, special character events called Heart-to-Hearts, and many enemies to take on. Speaking of battles, Xenoblade Chronicles' action combat system is its second defining feature. You've got auto attacks, special character-specific moves called arts, and aggro management among your team. Not to mention, protagonist Shulk can see the future, and your team of 3 characters can be used to activate chain attack combos. This system has a lot of moving parts, and it takes a while to understand, but it's oh so satisfying when you figure it out. While I do think Xenoblade 2 and 3 had stronger combat systems overall, I appreciate how the first game set the stage for its particular brand of combat to grow and thrive. It provided great building blocks for the amazing combat systems we had in the second and third games. As you explore the lands and fight the enemies of Xenoblade, you can certainly count on epic music to propel you forward in the background. This brings us to the third defining feature of Xenoblade Chronicles, and that's its incredible and emotional soundtrack. What a range this game's music has. Spirited melodies take hold as you traverse the Bionis and meet so many of its people. And when you're fighting enemies, you can expect hype-inducing electric guitar-filled songs like Engage the Enemy. These songs can get you through the most difficult of fights. My personal favorites, though, are the tender and emotional ballads of Xenoblade Chronicles, most notably the ending song, Beyond the Sky. Xenoblade Chronicles' ending is already something special, but this song makes it even more beautiful and satisfying. I couldn't help but shed some tears as the credits rolled when I finished my journey nearly 100 hours later. Last, but certainly not least, the fourth defining feature of Xenoblade Chronicles is its thought-provoking narrative that focuses on life and how different people value it. The game's well-written characters help illustrate these themes. It showcases several perspectives on life throughout its story, with 2 of the strongest examples being that of protagonist Shulk and antagonist Zanza. Here's a small spoiler warning for some of the events of Xenoblade Chronicles. At the start of the game, Shulk devotes his life to revenge after a dear friend is taken from him. But by the end of his journey, he comes to appreciate his loved ones more and becomes a champion of making sure people can live their lives as they choose. Zanza, on the other hand, only sees the people of the Bionis as a means to an end for his own power and survival. These contrasting views culminate in a compelling narrative that will leave you thinking long after you finish the game. Plus, there's plenty of fun, wacky, and heartwarming moments dispersed in between all the drama, thanks to characters like Rhine, Ricky, and Melia. My time with the Xenoblade series began when I bought Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition on a whim in 2020. In that moment, I had no idea that this series would become one of my favorites of all time just a few years later. But the more I played, the more I realized how special this game was. I couldn't stop exploring the world, and I really connected with the main cast. I wanted to see Shulk and his friends' stories through to the end. I'm especially grateful for Xenoblade Chronicles, its development team who poured their time into it, and its fans who've supported this series since the very beginning. It took all of those pieces to create what Xenoblade Chronicles is today, and all the possibilities it has for the future.
After the development of Xenoblade Chronicles had concluded, Takahashi then approached Yamagami and asked if he could develop a new science fiction RPG built upon the systems of Xenoblade Chronicles. Yamagami and Nintendo were willing to, and talks turned towards what Takahashi and Microsoft could do for Nintendo's next console at the time, the Wii U. Both directors of Xenoblade Chronicles, Genki Yokota and Kojima, returned for their original roles. And while the game was planned to release early in the Wii U's life cycle, the development issues of the game was eventually forcing the release date to be pushed back. They later commented on the fact that it was quite challenging of fitting the entire game on a single Wii U disc, with the game just barely fitting on a 32GB disc. Xenoblade Chronicles X would serve as Monolith Soft's first high-definition video game, and to help cope with this first, the team decided against using cutting-edge technology when designing the game, as well as using their experience and lessons from the first time when developing Xenoblade Chronicles for this new one, as well as setting upon limits of what they did during production. The team also had a challenge of creating an expansive world for players to explore within a tight development budget, and the implementation of online multiplayer was also a challenge due to the team's lack of experience. And also the game required a comprehensive story, which would then rewrite to recast the protagonist as now a player-created avatar. And the music was composed by none other than famous anime composer Hiroyuki Sawano. The game was first announced in 2013 under the working title X, and then would set a release date for the following year, but of course was delayed to 2015, with the game's localization now being handled by Nintendo Treehouse in 824, undergoing changes for its more western release. Xenoblade Chronicles X takes place on the uncharted planet known as Mira, following the destruction of Earth during the Alien War, with humanity now attempting to escape, with only a few ships surviving, and one such ship, known as the Colony New Los Angeles, had now crashed on a planet known as Mira in question. After being rescued from a hibernation pod by a woman now with the name of Elma, as well as the player character who will be a custom avatar, now becomes a member of Blade, which protects NLA and seeks the lifehold vital to their survival, while fending off the hostile Ganglion and investing Mira secrets. Xenoblade Chronicles X has similar gameplay mechanics to Xenoblade Chronicles, such as high freedom to explore the world and the ability to virtually one anywhere seen in the distance. The returns of the art spell system, as well as including both auto attacks and a cool time for each art, is back. But however, new things are introduced within this game, such as mechs, who are given the name of skells, a name from the word exoskeleton, which can be both used for combat and exploration. Skells have a limited amount of fuel that can only be restored at a price, or slowly regenerated when the skill is not in use. Rather than a preset group of characters in Xenoblade Chronicles 1, this successor introduces the ability to customize player's own character and name them at the beginning of the game. Collectibles are scattered around throughout the game's world, some acting as quest items, and enemies can drop armor and weapons that characters can equip. The character can also jump obstacles, and it was also shown that there will be no fall damage in this game during the stream of the Nintendo Treehouse. Battles now involve real-time combat in which guns for long-range attacks can be switched for knives to attack up close, and this can be immediately done as frequently are the battles necessary for these mechanics. The character will of course attack automatically when in range, but battle arts, which now have a cooldown time after being used and also having more powerful attacks or special abilities, are now used. There is also a soul voice ability similar to the likes of Xenoblade Chronicles 1's Affinity Boost, which grants characters bonuses such as a health boost if certain requirements are now met mid-battle. A TP system is also involved, in which an art requires an amount of TP, which is gained from auto attacks, and if a character runs out of HP, an ally can now revive them within 30 seconds if enough TP is stored, or the player can choose to restart from a nearby checkpoint immediately. If the player is not able to be revived within those 30 seconds, the battle can still be won if the other team members are able to defeat the enemy before the 30-second time limit are up. Xenoblade Chronicles X was well received for its combat and vast world size, while receiving some criticism for its sometimes complicated learning curve and the story. This game was pretty much a lost gem to the commercial failure that was the Wii U, and certain parts of X can be seen through future entries, like Elma making an appearance as a blade in Xenoblade Chronicles 2, and even the game gets referenced in Future Redeemed. Fans are desperately hoping that it does get a Switch port, Definitive Edition remaster, or even a remake, and maybe even comes on Nintendo's next new platform, maybe even a Nintendo Switch 2, and I for one am hoping that will be the case.
Xenoblade Chronicles 2 is, in my opinion, the best Xenoblade game out there. This game personally means a lot to me. I've known about the Xenoblade Chronicles series since about, I want to say 2013, when my friend showed me a cover of the game, but I really didn't get into it in 2018 when I finally decided to play Xenoblade Chronicles 2. It had almost been a year since it had come out, and when I finally played it, I realized just what I had stumbled upon. The Xenoblade RPG series is just phenomenal. I've played every single game except X, and every single one of them I've had massive enjoyment with. It's all thanks to Xenoblade Chronicles 2 that I became a huge fan of the series, and I am very looking forward to the next game in the series. But let's not talk about the whole series, we're just going to talk about Xenoblade Chronicles 2. To real quick summarize the development time of Xenoblade Chronicles 2, the development started around, I guess, July 2014 in the planning phase, and they basically went for, once again, another story-driven RPG similar to Xenoblade 1, and I believe it was mainly due to the fact that Xenoblade X was more focused on its, open world exploration, and they did get some negative backlash, some, not too much, compared to, the original. So, they wanted to, do the same thing that they did with Xenoblade 1 and just focus on its story. One cool thing I learned is that to speed up the development of Xenoblade 2, what they did was that they used, I guess, the basis of Xenoblade X, and they built upon that for Xenoblade 2, which I think is absolutely incredible. And I believe they, specifically Nintendo, wanted the game to be made for the Switch. And at the time, I believe they didn't know the specifications of the console, so they were just kind of doing a bit. But then once they got all the know-hows of the Switch, that's when they were able to fully go in. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 was announced on January 12, 2017 during the Nintendo presentation, where they were finally showing off the Switch, all the games that were going to be coming out to it in the near future, and so much more. And the game would finally release on December 1st, 2017, a worldwide release, which was the first time that a Xenoblade game got a simultaneous worldwide release date. And ever since then, all the other Xenoblade games would follow. So when it comes to the gameplay of Xenoblade 2, it's pretty much very similar to how it was with Xenoblade 1. You have 3 characters on the field, and they're pretty much doing their attacks, and they have their arts. However, something that they did was that they simplified the way the arts were. Something that they did that I love is that now arts are button related. So the specific art will be tied to a button. This is incredible in my opinion. Definitely made it simpler to execute arts instead of just moving it around. So instead of moving the control stick to the left, all I gotta do is just press one button and the art will just do its thing. Not only that, I love how you can cancel arts into arts. And the game rewarded you for it, because whenever you would cancel your art, your damage would be a lot stronger. But what came out of art canceling was attack canceling. You can be mid-attack and you can stop what you're doing and just move around. Compared to Xenoblade 1, where if you're moving around, you'll just pretty much just move around and continue to attack. You can't really stop your attack, you just continue going. But with Xenoblade 2, it was so broken that, for example, with Rex and Mithra, the first attack, you can cancel it and just end up doing more damage just by doing the first attack than canceling, than just doing your whole move. This allowed you to rack up points quicker so you can get your arts to reload. This allowed characters to do some stupid bonkers stuff with each class. And speaking of classes, let's talk about this game's class system. While it isn't called class system per se, it's essentially just blades. Something new to this game was that they added a way for us to be able to use multiple weapons. See, in Xenoblade 1, all you had was pretty much the main style, the way the character plays, and their arts, and that's it. They all played the same, and they fulfilled pretty much the same role. But with Xenoblade 2, with the addition of blades, each blade had a unique style of play. You know, you had, of course, you know, using the Aegis of swords for Rex. But then you also have later on, like, you get lances, you can get like axes, blitz balls, and many others. Each of those weapons had their specific arts. However, I also don't recommend equipping 2 of those same styles onto one character. Because say for example, you have 2 lance units on one character, the art cooldown will pretty much return back to the next character. So you won't actually be able to spam the arts again. And I love the way the arts cooldown was in this game. The fact that instead of having it be timers was incredible, because now you can just pretty much attack and that's how you fill it up. So the more you attack, especially with this attack canceling, the more you can just spam your arts. It was incredible and I loved it. Way better than the time mechanic. But going back to blades, right? While I loved blades, I loved getting them and they were all really cool. What I didn't like was the fact that how you have to get all your other blades. See, there are other blades you can get via quests, but the majority of them were all from the gacha system. It was atrocious. That's all I gotta say. I'm not a fan of the gacha system, especially the grind for it, and we're just gonna leave it at that. But I did love the blades. Each blade had an element as well associated with it. There were about 8 elements, if I can recall, and there would be like specific combos that you can get to it with your like blade combos. See, this game had blade specials. You had level 1, level 2, level 3, and then level 4. Of course, getting to level 1 is easier, and then as you progress to get to level 4, it takes a while. doing the blade level 1 was the easiest one because that's when you start the blade combo. Say for example, you start with fire, and then you pretty much get like these lists on the top right of the screen, and it will show you what you can combo into. So for example, you can combo fire, fire, and fire. So from there, the next step was to get fire level 2, whether it be with you or whoever has a blade, a fire blade. And then third level, which would be, level 3 special. So you got to get to level 3 special and then do it. With this, it would actually form a stronger version of the special. So once you complete the special, it'll do some extra damage with it, and depending on which element you use, something different would happen. It allowed for some stupid, crazy combinations that you pretty much are just able to like decimate your opponents. And of course, the chain attacks return, working pretty similarly. However, I feel like it's a lot easier to execute a chain attack, especially given how all you gotta do is crack open the orbs. And the way you got those orbs is for doing the blade combos. So when you finish with all fire, a fire orb will be surrounding the enemy. And then when you do a chain attack and you break that orb, you get more chances of your chain attack. It sounds a lot complex when I explain it, but when you start executing it in the game, you just start to see just how easy it is to perform. I don't want to carry on too much, but once again, I will end it with Xenoblade Chronicles is a phenomenal series. I love Xenoblade Chronicles 2, my personal favorite. I have a bias, it's personally my favorite game in terms of its story and whatnot, but I really do think Xenoblade 2 was incredible. It changed my life, and I'm just glad to finally be a fan of this series. Thank you for having me.
Xenoblade Chronicles 2 Torna the Golden Country served as Xenoblade 2's final DLC, a brand new story that was first announced at E3 of 2018. While first released as that final slot for the DLC expansion pack, Torna also received a standalone physical release 1 week later, paired with download codes for 2's expansion pack if players who enjoyed the game wanted to try out the base game for themselves. In terms of development, Torna the Golden Country's original concept involved being pitched as an actual candidate for the main story of the base game of Xenoblade Chronicles 2 back in 2015, but series director Tetsuya Takahashi had concerns regarding the development time as a result, and instead chose to shelve the pitch. He then considered to include the story of Torna in between chapters 7 and 8 of the then finalized story that we know today, just after the main group falls into the Cloud Sea and arrives at the land of Moratha. However, the goals that he had envisioned grew so large that would have been so out of place that Takahashi ended up snubbing it all, keeping his thoughts tucked away on his computer. It wasn't until the opportunity of thinking for the DLC candidates that Torna resurfaced. Sporting a new rendering engine over the base game, Torna the Golden Country showed that the developers were indeed listening in on the critiques players had while playing through Xenoblade Chronicles 2. From stronger tutorials and a new tip section in the main menu, to a more streamlined game map, updated item collection and crafting systems, many of the smaller nitpickings that fans had about the base game, everything felt a bit more resolved, with 11 new tracks from Yasunori Mitsuda to carry us through the pristine and lush Titan of Torna, as well as a more untamed past version of Gormott than what players had known. Torna offered a charming world belied by somber and mature themes. Many of the interactions taking place in this game would also involve the newly introduced community feature, an aspect of the game where, as the main party met new people and helped them on their journey, they would become a community member. A set amount of NPCs joining the community would then elevate the player's community level, unlocking more quests which would then bring in more community members and so on and so forth. With 89 NPCs in total to bring into the community system to reach the max of 5 levels, this first iteration of the feature is generally frowned upon due to the fact that both levels 2 and 4 gated story progress, meaning that if a player wanted to replay the game for story purposes and not involve themselves with the side quests, well, they're always gated behind obtaining at least 64 members within the community. But let's discuss the real meat of any Xenoblade game, the combat. Boasting a revamped battle system, there are 9 playable characters encompassing the party split into 3 teams. Laura with Jin and Hayes, Adam with Mithra and Minoth, and Hugo with Bridget and Aegean. Unlike the base game where blades channeled ether to their drivers, the team is much more hands-on in Torna's time through the use of the Vanguard and Rearguard implementation, with a whole new subset of arts for characters to use if they are deployed in the rear guard. Blade combos and chain attacks also got a moderate revamp as well. All of this allowed for smooth and streamlined gameplay, which felt a little more intuitive to players than the base game had offered. And that's just about the gist of Torna the Golden Country, in entering the franchise that received generally positive reviews. And as the first DLC story entry within the Xenoblade series, this also really set an exceptionally high bar for what players began to expect with regards to future DLCs going forward. As for just some quick thoughts, as I've played through Torna a few times personally, I just want to say that I was really ecstatic to see how Torna played out. I don't know about others who have played through Xenoblade Chronicles 2, but as that story had concluded for me, one of the things I had wished for was that we could have seen or gotten to know a bit more about the Aegis War, more about Laura and Adam, and even the Kingdom of Torna itself. So when Torna the Golden Country was announced, my mind raced at how this game was going to pull off its conclusion. After all, Torna's tale is one that ends in tragedy and trauma. To say the game had surpassed my expectations is a strong understatement. My only gripe with regards to the community feature then is that they should have made it skippable for players once they have made a new game plus save file on record for anyone who just wanted to replay the main story. I thoroughly enjoyed every moment of Torna the Golden Country, from the bittersweet scenes to the raw jazz-infused combat, and yes, even the Green Barrel side quest.
When Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition was released in 2020 for Nintendo Switch, it did not only just improve the original game with having better graphics and other quality of life features, but also it brought something extra as well. In an interview with Nintendo Life, the concept of this extra story from Takahashi stated that there was a lingering feeling of pity towards Melia, but really there were two reasons. First, it would appeal to existing fans and would continue the story towards the future of Xenoblade. And second was so that they could finally show off the shoulder of the Bionis, a map that didn't fit into the main game, but was perfectly suited for this role. A place beyond imagination where at the end of the game, the Telethia are seen flying by in ancient times. Some may have also noticed that this is the same place where Hourglass speaks in the scene where, of course, we see Ego's memories. According to Mr. Takami, the game's art director, this is because no other location offered a better side profile of the Bionis. It is a shame we were not able to explore it too. The story for this one, however, was not written by Takahashi, but by cutscene lead Ota Mamoru, after the story was determined by the staff. The script for quests, such as the Noponoga ones, however, are written by a team led by Iwamoto Mashiro, as usual. In regards to Link of Future Connected, Takahashi says that if he played it himself, it would take him 10 to 12 hours to clear it, and that would take longer for someone playing it for the first time, around 20 hours if including side content. He also says that if they turned it into a paid DLC like Torna the Golden Country, that they could have made it longer, but they felt it was inappropriate to charge fans too much for a remaster, and using too many resources for the Definitive Edition would have had an adverse effect on development of the new game they were currently working on. So they did their best to balance resources and work. And this new scenario isn't simply a new story to be told, but a stone of sorts, pointing towards the future. The events take place, and the words spoken by the characters in Future Connected are linked to the future of Xenoblade Chronicles itself. It's a hope that Monolith, as you experience this new scenario, this new scenario. You enjoy dreaming of what sort of future that might be. This extra story in question was of course known as Future Connected, and thus was the second Xenoblade story expansion, after Xenoblade 2's Torna the Golden Country in 2018. Albeit as an extra piece of content day one within Xenoblade Definitive Edition. And while players can play without beating the main story, it's obviously not recommended. Future Connected takes place after the events of the first game, with Shulk and Melia, with their VAs from the original game, reprising their roles for this, exploring the Bionic Soldier, and then they encounter Ricky's own children, both Kino and Nene, who become Heropon in honor of their Dadapon. They also encounter surviving Hyentia and warn the team about a looming, dangerous threat known as the Fog King, which then Melia of course decides to investigate as it's now part of her newfound duty. The battle mechanics are similar to the first game, but stuff like visions and skill trees are completely removed, and chain attacks are now replaced by a new battle mechanic called the Union Strikes. These involve the Pawn Spectres, which are supporting non-pawn characters, and they can participate in battles with strong group attacks. Shulk and Melia retain their main arts from base game, as well as Kino and Nene fight with arts similar to that of both Shala and Rain. Among other things like heart-to-hearts now being replaced by quiet moments, which are very similar in premise but do not have branching paths, but are completely fully voice acted. Characters no longer have skills or skill branches, and things like unique monsters drop arts coins instead of affinity coins, which are then used to buy advanced art manuals. Gem crafting is no longer available. Instead of unrefined crystals, mining ether deposits produces gems directly. Future Connected would sort of have a mixed response by fans, as while the loose ends were tied up nicely, new characters like Kino and Nene were also a good addition, as well as certain characters get their arc resolved, and of course, the music and exploration remained a high point, just like with every other Xenoblade game. However, when it came to both the story and the writing, as well as the combat in general, those things were deeply criticized.
Sup y'all, Crimson Rosso here with my section of this Xenoblade Saga retrospective, and I'm going to talk about the downright sexiest one in the franchise, Xenoblade 3. In all seriousness though, Xenoblade 3 was my absolute favorite in the series out of all the ones I've played, and I'm super thankful for Matt, Kaiser, and everyone else taking part in this for letting me cover this game. With that said, let's get to it. Teased back in an interview with the Hyentia's ruler Jenna Coleman, and then starting its development in 2018 after Torna entered the Gold era, Xenoblade was focused more on being a story-driven experience that brought elements both old and new into this thrilling new entry. And shockingly, for a game released in the 2020s era of gaming, Xenoblade 3 was hit with barely any delays, unless you were in Europe, but other than that, the game didn't suffer any of that. And when it was released on July 29th, 2022 for the Nintendo, it was met with impressive levels of positive reception from both fans and critics alike. Hell, this game got such positive reception, it had become the first Xenoblade game to be nominated for Game of the Year. Yeah, this got to stand on the same level as games like God of War Ragnarok and Elden Ring. That's a fucking achievement for a series that was still pretty niche for many gamers. Adding to this, the game didn't really have a whole lot of issues either. Other than some frame drops every now and again, the game ran pretty well, even in handheld mode. Hell, fun fact, these games have 2 different recordings for the characters so their lip syncs can match up with either the English or Japanese VA. You can tell an immense amount of love was put into this title from that alone. That and of course the impressive voice acting and gameplay, but we'll get to that later. So what's it about? Well, it follows an ongoing war on the land of Ionos between the Kieves and the Ognis. Think I pronounced that right? I don't know. As Noah and his two childhood besties, Uni and Lans, fight in this war with their limited lifespan in the service of their queen before their life goes to the mighty flame clock. During this war, they encounter the trio of Mio, Senna, and Tyon. And once the six receive the odd power of the Ouroboros and are freed from their flame clocks, they embark on a journey for safety from this war and to free others from it as well. Along the way, to discover more and more about not only this war and the world it's happening in, along with the single most important thing of all, how babies are made. In an interview with the developers, they stated that they wanted this game to be about two forces coming together to take on an unreasonable power, which fits the themes of the main characters going up against something that feels as unstoppable and immovable as the Mobius. So enough about this game's achievements. What was the gameplay like? How about we compare it to the one before it for comparison? You see, unlike Xenoblade 2, which had a focus on blades and their field skills to progress throughout the game, and of course the infamous gacha system, Xenoblade 3 instead chose to focus on class-based gameplay, offering several different classes that every character could choose from healers to swordsmen to even gun users. You can be the rootinest tootinest cowboy in the West if you so wish. This also allowed players to be more experimental with their gameplay, as they weren't tied to a gacha system and field skills to progress the story. Extra classes were unlocked through hero quests, which were like if the blade quests in Xenoblade 2 were how you got blades instead of the gacha system. After completing said quests, you would get the class, plus the character-specific hero would join you on your journey, creating you an interchangeable 7th party member. That gave you an extra attack member and ability to utilize in both chain attacks and normal battles, with the only downside being you couldn't control them. Alongside this was the combat, which honestly remained mostly unchanged from 2. They instead focused on fleshing out things like arc canceling to improve combo speed and fill up special attacks for certain characters, and added on to the chain attacks for a more mechanically complex experience, when you weren't using break, topple, launch, and smash, the devil's favorite combo. Gemstones from 1 also returned for this game, but were made a lot more balanced and were severely streamlined down to just 25 from the literal dozens upon dozens you could obtain in 1. Adding on to this was the inclusion of the Ouroboros fusion between 2 characters, which added what was basically a super mode where 2 characters fused into 1 to deal large amounts of damage, at the cost of having to fill it up to use it in the first place and having to deal with a cooldown period after it was used, so it wasn't really something you could just spam willy-nilly. I'm sure you've noticed by now that this game was more along the lines of improving upon what worked in Xenoblade 1 and 2, instead of just creating something completely new for this game. So we've talked about development and the gameplay, so what do I think about this game? Well, to put it plain and simple, I love it. It was my personal game of the year in 2022, and its DLC is a strong contender for my game of the year in 2023. I love all the characters, I love the story, and I love the gameplay more than both of the first 2 things combined. It's a phenomenal title that any JRPG fan can fall in love with. And if I had any complaints about this game, it's that the villains aren't exactly the best. They certainly aren't horrible by any means, but they are pretty uninspiring in comparison to the likes of Jin and Malus from 2. Hell, I'd argue the DLC villain Alpha was far more compelling in comparison to the Mobius. But other than that, and the fact this game kind of gives you one too many tutorials, it is an incredibly solid masterpiece the whole way through, and a definite must-play for anyone who loves JRPGs. With that out of the way, I'm going to hand it back to Mad Kaiser, and thanks once again for everyone having me. Back to you, bud.
Xenoblade Chronicles Future Redeemed is the culmination of every single Xenoblade Chronicles game, even Xenoblade Chronicles X, Torna the Golden Country, everything led to Future Redeemed. I would say this exact same thing for Xenoblade Chronicles 3 back last year in 2022. But little did I know how monumental the finale of this saga would be. Flash forward to last year, when many of us completed Xenoblade Chronicles 3, the base game. I really wanted the DLC story to be a prequel like Torna the Golden Country, because many small hints in the story of Xenoblade Chronicles 3 pointed to what happened before Ouroboros, before Noah, Mio, Lanz, Senna, Taion, and Uni. We saw the founder statues in the city. We heard so much about what Mobius used to be like. We heard so much about what the city used to be like, especially in the hero quests that we got from the DLC waves 2 and 3. And not only that, some small little lore details about Ionios, the Ouroboros stone, the Sword of Origin. It was all shrouded in mystery. So I said myself, we need the DLC to be a prequel. Of course, I would love to see what happens when Noah and Mio reunite, but we need to see everything that happened before for a lot of this to make sense. And then we got the glorious February teaser for Xenoblade Chronicles 3's Wave 4 DLC. I was over the moon. I had an insane reaction seeing Shulk and Rex all grown up. Little did I know how amazing Future Redeemed would be. Future Redeemed is absolutely fantastic. The gameplay is truly immaculate. Of course, Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is a combination of what made the gameplay great in Xenoblade Chronicles 1 and 2. As you can see, the Kevis characters play like Xenoblade Chronicles 1 characters, and the Agnes characters play like Xenoblade 2 characters. But one thing I really appreciate about Xenoblade Chronicles 3 Future Redeemed is not only did it streamline a lot of the class system and a lot of the combat elements within Xenoblade 3's gameplay loop, but also the exploration and the open world traversal is the best that the series has ever seen, and I think it is one of the best exploration incentive mechanics ever implemented in a video game ever. Someone might have already talked about Xenoblade Chronicles X, but the Frontier Nav in Xenoblade Chronicles X is the one thing that always keeps me back coming to play that game. And of course, the Affinity Goal system is the next step and the next evolution of the Frontier Nav system. It really incentivizes you to go out and explore, fight monsters, do quests, find new things, find new affinity unlock kits and gem unlock kits, and this contained section of Ionios in the Cent Omnia region is one of the best areas to explore and just have fun in a Xenoblade game, and I love the Affinity Goal system so much. The story, of course, is amazing. It's beautiful, it's emotional, and the characters are amazing. Matthew is one of my favorite Xenoblade protagonists. My love for Matthew is growing ever so much even after playing the game. A is an amazing companion. I love them so much. Their dynamic with Matthew is so great to see, often funny at times, but A has a very serious demeanor, bringing a lot of wisdom to the party as well. It was great seeing Shulk and Rex as kids, of course, but of course, Shulk and Rex are in the game. They look amazing, they sound amazing, they feel amazing to play as, and it's just so amazing hearing some of these dialogue conversations with these characters that we spent so many hours with, going on long, arduous journeys through Bionis, Mechonis, and Ulrest, and seeing them all grown up and mature. It's so amazing and so beautiful, honestly. The ending of Future Redeemed capped off the Klaus Saga in the Xenoblade Chronicles series, the story of a man whose hubris led to many different worlds being created, but so many different conflicts, so many different struggles, and so much pain that so many people had to endure. But all the questions, all the pain, all the struggles came to a boiling point in Xenoblade Chronicles 3 Future Redeemed. And all of our questions were answered. All of our doubts were put in place. And the ending was so amazing, so beautiful, and it really made me think of how genius of a storyteller Tetsuya Takahashi is. And many people on Twitter were saying, dang, Xenoblade is over, I cried so much during the credits, and of course I teared up a bit too, but honestly, during the credits and especially during the final hours of the game, I just had the biggest smile on my face, and it was mostly because I was smiling because I remembered all of the happy memories. I didn't necessarily cry because it was over. I smiled because it all happened. All the amazing memories of Xenoblade 1, Future Connected, Xenoblade 2, Xenoblade X, Torna the Golden Country, and Xenoblade 3 all just flooded in, and it made me think, this is the greatest story in the entirety of video games for me, and I'm so happy to see it come to a beautiful conclusion. I guess I could say one complaint I have with Xenoblade 3 Future Redeemed is it all happened so quickly, because DLC Wave 4 was hinted at the February Direct of this year, and out of nowhere we just got a shadow drop in April, and it was releasing the next week. I was honestly just editing a Zelda Tears of the Kingdom video, and out of nowhere I got a bunch of notifications on Discord saying Xenoblade is coming out next week, and that was great, but at the same time it was such a rush for all of us content creators, having to make content, having to make theories and all of that. It was fun, but it was quite the rush. And then we played the game, enjoyed the game, completed the game, but right after that, for us Zelda fans like myself, Tears of the Kingdom was right after that. So even though I really enjoyed Future Redeemed, I feel like if I had some more time to marinate on it, I would have enjoyed it so much more, and I would have made so much more content on it. But that doesn't mean I forgot about Future Redeemed. Future Redeemed is one of the best games I've played in the entirety of 2023, and I will say, if you are looking forward to more Future Redeemed content, why not subscribe to my channel, Niche Quick Pops. I talk about all things Nintendo, Zelda, Xenoblade, Persona, everything like that. If you enjoy content like this, check out my channel, and I hope to see you in future videos in the comment section below. Thank you so much, Mad Kaiser, for having me on this video. I love doing collabs like this, and I love spreading my passion in the Xenoblade community and with Xenoblade fans. So if you enjoy anything Xenoblade, give me a follow on Twitter and subscribe to my YouTube channel. I hope you guys have a great day, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Later.
And there you have it, folks. I hope you guys enjoyed this wonderful retrospective that me and my friends put out for you to enjoy, especially if you are Xenoblade fans or Xeno fans in general. So, by all means, what is your favorite Xeno game entirely? Why does it mean a lot to you? And do you guys hope that Xenoblade X does come to Nintendo Switch? And do you guys also hope that Xenogears gets a remake and Xenosaga Trilogy gets a remaster? Let me know in the comments down below. Anyway guys, until then, see you guys in the next video. Mad Kaiser, out.
They're waiting for you, Melia.
Does this world need a coronation? I just don't see the point.
Don't say that. It is the will of the people. It will mark the birth of a new era.